now open the committee of the whole on item number 1, government entities. What's your pleasure, council? Mrs. Stanley?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion to recommend, in accordance with Code of Ordinances, Section 2-184, the reestablishment of the Stanley Lasker Richter Memorial Park Authority, the Conservation Commission, and the Environmental Impact Commission through June 30th, 2013.
Seconded by Mr. Seabury. Under discussion, Mr. Visconti?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just for clarification, what we are voting on is the authority itself and nothing to do with the House. Am I correct?
Correct, Mr. Visconti.
Thank you.
Okay. You know, before I tell you, Mr. Cheese, if I could, I'd like to just ask Mr. Pinter if he would just give, for the council's benefit, just a description about the entities review and the extension of the authorities that are under discussion tonight, just so everybody's clear on what we're talking about.
It's my pleasure to do that, Mr. President. Briefly, the Code of Ordinances sections beginning at 2-175, I believe it is, 176, and up to 2-186, states that the Common Council once a year looks at what really is a rotating listing of groups of entities, authorities, commissions, boards. Each year looks at it one group. This year there are 3 in there. What the Common Council does is appoint a committee which reviews, and this committee did that. The committee that reported back to you in March. The committee reviewed all of the 3 entities. Sometimes there's 4 or 5 or 6 entities, sometimes fewer. So what they do in accordance with that ordinance is to take a look at the type of people who head or participants or members in those groups to come in to provide what essentially is evidence that they're operating properly, that they're doing the job that the authority for the commission was authorized to do, and to persuade and request that the Common Council, in accordance with certain factors which the Council can consider, that the Council would reapprove, reauthorize the continued existence of those groups for a period of up to 5 years. The Council does not have to reestablish any of those groups, terminate a group, or it can renew its existence for a period shorter than 5 years. If the Council decides to terminate one or more of these entities, there's a 1-year run-out period. Basically, it gives the Commission time to, the board's time to dissolve appropriately and take care of the assets. So, you're here tonight in that yearly review to consider these 3 entities. A committee of the Council has reported out to you recommending that all 3 be reestablished for a period of 5 years. That ordinance provides that this public hearing tonight is an opportunity for the public to tell you about what the committee recommended, essentially, and then you make your decision from there.
Thank you, Mr. Pinter. Mr. Pinter, before you just step away, if I can just follow up with the authorities don't necessarily mean the members that are on the authority. They're appointed through the recommendations are made by the mayor's office, and then the members are approved or denied by the membership of the council. Am I correct?
In most cases, in almost all cases, yes.
Mr. Cheney's?
Thank you again. Through the chair, I think Corporation Council kind of answered my question for me. Can we actually make less than the 5 years that's recommended?
Yes.
That the answer could be yes on that one. But my thought would be, at least to have a discussion amongst the council here, that giving the report that's in front of us here, that the Richter House Authority, not the House, the Richter Park Authority is going through a major transposition right now with this plan that's in front of them. And currently, since I've been on this council for 3 years, we've never got any reports from this authority. They're good, they're bad, or anything from them. So it may be something, I know it was mentioned this evening as well, that we should make it a shorter time to give an opportunity from the authority to present something to this council to see whether or not they are achieving their goals. But by giving them a 5-year, that may be too long, but if we go a year or 2 years, that way it'll give them time to go through the plan that's in front of them now, make their recommendation, and actually present it to this council to say, yes, we agree with that, and then we'll give them the 5 years to implement that and to go forward. I think that I was at that meeting, and it is a nice plan. It's a 20-year plan, but they're still going through the motions of accepting that plan. But none of us on this council really know what that plan's about. I mean, the presentation itself was a 2.5-hour presentation, so it's a pretty detailed plan. But we should at least have the opportunity to take a look at that and say, yes, we agree with this plan, because it's a if I understand, it's a 20-year plan. But once it's adopted and approved, then we as a council really don't have much to say on it. So I think we have the opportunity now to. So, I'm not going to make any motion at this time, but just think about it, whether or not we should at least entertain the idea of making it less than the 5 years.
Mr. Lee?
Sorry. I too concur with what Councilman Shanice said about possibilities of a shorter term. And I was reading in the section 2.181 of the code, where in fact those folks that did get up and speak in reference to the programs, item 6 of that section of the ordinance actually requires an analysis of the programs. It says any analysis of services to be provided and programs to be pursuant to the government entities to continue its existence. So I think we should have some idea as to what's happening with the Richter House and any of the authority itself, which has had some troubled financial times, it appears. I too would say that it's a good authority, and I'm not going to make any motion to that extent, but I would also concur with Councilman Shanice as far as maybe we should consider a shorter period. We could be of perhaps some assistance if Richter falls in more difficult times than they are right now. So I just offer that as well.
First Lady, thank you. Mrs. Stanley?
I can gather my thoughts quickly. 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. The authority has the opportunity, they have a plan, and even if it's 1 year, we still have the opportunity to find out that master plan and be a part of it. Am I correct in saying so? So I don't understand what the difference is with the length of the term. What happens, happens, and we have a say. If and when we can have a say, we can do that. What does the time limit have to do with anything? It's just a question, just throwing it out there. I understand and I agree that there is something going on and that we should try and save the Richter House. But I mean, at this point, it's just the amount of time.
Thank you, Mrs. Stanley. Mr. Perry?
I think there's a necessity. I don't think we should. I think we do have to put. I would be for making a motion for 2 years, just to put them on the authority on notice that there's a need here. I mean, the public, you read it in the paper. I belong to Richter Park. I've seen the house dilapidate, and nobody seems to be concerned about it. And I agree. I'm a golfer. I'm not into the yards, and I really like the fact the golf course is great. But maybe let them know that we're putting. I think we're putting pressure on it. I'd be for putting it to 2 years.
Second.
That's a motion. I'll make a motion that we limit the Richter Park authority to 2 years.
So now under discussion on the motion, on the Mr. Curran's motion, Mr. Visconti?
Thank you, Mr. President. With all due respect to Councilwoman Stanley, I know where she's coming from, but when you look at the figures that were presented in a recent article in the local paper, where I believe it was in the late 80s or 90s, the Richter Park was taking in between $800 and $1 million a year in profit. And then all of a sudden, the bottom seems to have fallen out there down to about $150,000 or $160,000 in profit. And again, as Councilman Curran just concurred, nothing seems to be being taken care of except for the golf course itself, which is why perhaps the house has been let go. So I think it probably is a good idea to put them on notice and shorten the term somewhat and let them know that we know what's going on, we see what's going on, and we want a little bit better report from them and want to see some improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wisconsin. Mr. Rochelle?
Thanks, Mr. President. I've been on government entities for a couple of years, and Councilman Basso has been on it for a long time. Councilman Kern's on it now. He's new on it, but he's been doing a good job. We go through this every year where we review these government entities, and I gotta say, like 80% of the time, the entities themselves don't even show up. So we sort of make these decisions in a vacuum. We, a couple of years ago, instituted a program where the heads of the authorities have to fill out a form and hand it in. They don't have to, but they're encouraged to fill out a form. So even if they don't show up, we have some idea of what they've been doing in the last couple of years. But we have a tendency of shutting down government entities that haven't had 5-10 years. And there's a lot of them out there. This year it was interesting because when the Richter Park government entities came up, I think it was last month, they actually showed up and they spoke for, it seemed like 20-25 minutes. And I have to tell you that the head of the Richter Park Association was underlined, extremely forthcoming about the issues that are facing Richter Park. Golf, I'm not saying Richter Park, golf in general is at a crossroads. We've all heard the reports, the rumors that golf is not quite as popular as it used to be. I don't know if that's a temporary thing or if it's going to be like tennis in the 70s, you couldn't get a court and now you've got courts all over town that are empty. I don't know if that's going to happen at golf, probably not, but I think it's well understood that the receipts at Richter are not going to be as dependable in the next couple of years from the golf angle as they might have been in the past. The head of the Richter Park Association also gave us some embarrassing information that didn't necessarily put his stewardship in the best possible light, but coming away from that meeting with the authority, I was struck by their consistency and their honesty and their determination to improve the facility under their stewardship. It's true we've got a choice tonight. And speaking just briefly to Colleen Stanley, my colleague, you know, if we give them 5 years, and I made a motion to give them 5 years, and I stand by that motion, although I will support a different year frame. And I have to, just for the record, say that the House did not come up in our discussions. Everything else but the House came up in the discussions, and I think that had they mentioned the House at the meeting, I might not have gone for 5 years. But anyway, that's in the past, and we're looking forward now. But we have a decision to make, and the decision ultimately is an authority the best possible way to manage Richter? It doesn't have to be an authority. We could do it ourselves, we could privatize. There's a lot of ways we can go with Richter, but if we choose an authority, the next question we have to ask is, are the people who are presently on the authority the best people for the job? So we've got a couple of decisions to make, not necessarily here tonight, but certainly by the next meeting. And I did say to the authority at the last meeting that I thought it would be a very good idea, understanding the delicate nature of Richter Park, the future, that they come at some point and speak to the council. And that we set something up, whether it's another public hearing just for Richter. There's clearly a lot of interest in the community about this. And maybe right now, because the situation is a bit fragile for Richter, the council might want to take a more active interest. I do not want to say, I'm not saying, and I'm not even implying that the present stewardship of Richter Park is at all deleterious. They're doing, they're volunteers, their heart's in the right place, they're working hard, they've been working hard. And I expect them to work hard in the future, and they've assured me, Councilman Curran, members of the commission, that they are going to continue doing that. But it may be that they're reaching out a little bit for some help, and it may be that we might want to think about giving them a hand. So whatever the body wants to do tonight, I'm all for, but I just want the body to understand that they did speak to us last month, which was very unusual for government entities. As I said, they rarely even show up, but they did speak to us. They seem to be aware of the situation. They seem to be determined to do as good a job as they possibly can. Thank you.
Mr. Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. I feel that, first of all, the issue that stands before us tonight is the issue of seating the authority. And as I understand it, that's the only issue that we have to look at. I feel that the authority to be seated for 5 years, all due respect to Chairman Curran and the committee. As I understand it, they made a recommendation to go ahead and seat for 5 years. Well, I really truly believe that we have to go along with what the committee had done in terms of they did their homework, they did the studies, and therefore they should certainly be willing to stand here and say, yes, we can go along 5 years. On the other hand, one must understand that one has to give, the mayor and this council the respect of choosing the mayor, I guess, choosing the right people for the authority. And then secondly, there's no reason why this council can't, even though you seat for 5 years, that this council can't say, listen, we expect that within a short period of time, maybe 2 to 3 months, we expect a notification, whatever way it might be presented, either written form or come before the dais and give us an update on what is transcribing, what is going on at this time. I too realize that there's been some issues, but I think that right now, go ahead with the 5-year plan and then be aware of what's going on, and maybe ask for updates every 3 or 4 months and let it go. But to change your stand all of a sudden to 2 years, to 3 years, to 1 year, it's really not going to make much difference. I would go with the 5 years. The state of Connecticut even says on IEC, I guess, that it's a 5-year, it could be a 5-year plan. I don't think the state of Connecticut is wrong all the time, even though I admit most of the time they are. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Burke?
I'm not exactly sure whether the duration of the authority would matter that much, other than to possibly put them on watch. But I think that what they need or could use is more oversight. I mean, part of the problem that they're having now, we just need more of a watchdog to make sure things are the way they're supposed to be. So that's just.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Mr. Sadi?
Thank you, Mr. President. I seconded Mr. Curran's amendment because I think what it does is it allows the Richter Park Authority to continue to operate as it's supposed to operate without us micromanaging their affairs, but gives them a deadline for which really to shoot for getting everything in order that they need to by admission of the chairman. And it probably actually gives the members themselves a good hard time frame within which to get certain things in order that they need to. I don't think we should be micromanaging affairs of commissions and boards nor the authority, but they do need to be on some level of notice that they need to report back, which is exactly what this is coming back and having an opportunity to address issues and not having 5 years, but 2 years. So that's why I seconded the motion and continue to support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
I have 2 questions for Corporation Counsel, please. Attorney Pinter, briefly, could you affirm or deny that Richter is using public funds or using their own funds?
Their own
When
funds.
I say public funds, I mean taxpayer funds, their own funds being, authority funds.
Although I can't say to you 100% for sure, but I believe they generate their own funds. Whether there's a small component that comes from outside sources is impossible, but I don't know for sure. But I think it's mostly their funds.
And to follow up on that, if they needed to float a bond, for instance, I mean, let's say they wanted to come up with $1 million to do the house or whatever, the 20, right? Do we guarantee those funds to the taxpayers of Danbury? Is that how that works with an authority? Okay. So if they default, we have to bail them out. Okay.
But we can recover that default through assets, the assets that they might have, in other words, lien those assets or acquire those assets to recover those losses.
The amendment is to shorten the recommended authority time from 5 years down to 2. Practically speaking, let's say that we pass the amendment and the amendment carries tonight and the council picks it up next month, and we now have a 2-year authority for Richter Park. And during that 2 years, we discover, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but we decide to disband the authority. How are we going to do that? And what does that mean for Richter Park? It's 2 years down the road, this sunset expires, we don't re-up it. What happens? What are we doing here when we knock this down in 2 years? This is a delicate time for them, and I'm worried that we could be having a bit of a roller coaster. We reach them in the nadir, we're really mad at them or whatever, and we decide to disband it, and now we've opened up a huge can of worms. So if you could just explain to me what would happen on a practical sense. It's now 2010, it's the summer, we disband, where do we go?
All right, let me answer that question and then give you 2 quick points that might help. I wanted to reserve them until all the discussion we had. If an authority like this is terminated, as I mentioned before, there's a period of time, usually a year, it could be more than a year, but typically a year, for a run-out time when dissolution occurs. That's the liquidation of assets, securing the release of any mortgages and other encumbrances. That's the period in which someone is retained to oversee that process. The 2 things I wanted to mention, and I can follow up if you have any questions on the first one. The 2 things I wanted to mention to you is first that it's hard to know how the ability of an authority who can bond itself or obtain assets or borrow, how they would be affected by a 2-year term or 1-year term versus a 5-year term. That is hard to know. Maybe that's a negative when you go out to the market, I don't know. The second, and perhaps more important and helpful to you, is that there is what you might call, it's never used, but there is what's called, you might call a bailout or catch-all provision in the Code of Ordinances, which says that whatever length of time you give to an entity, 5 years or less, you can override that to terminate the entity at any time. Again, with the run-out period in force. So even if you go the 5-year route or 4-year route, whatever will term, let's say 5 years, the Common Council is authorized, if it sees or examines the operations during the year, they can at any time essentially draw them back in, pluck them back in out of that grouping, and revisit them at any time. So you have that authority right now. But again, the first point is the 5 years, it's hard to say if you shorten it to a specific time, how that might affect their ability to do business. Those are the 2 things I want to mention to you in addition to answer your question.
Yeah, thanks. I had thought about that. So what you're saying is that if they wanted to do a 20-year bond or a 10-year bond or something like that, and it took a year and a half to get it, a bank might be reticent giving them the money within 6 months and you could disband them. Is that what you're saying?
Or perhaps they get the message through, the motion that's made that we have some uncertainty about their future. 1 year, 2 years, that might give somebody, an institution or somebody, some pause and say, well, there's some concerns out there, so we step back and maybe we're less willing to put assets forward toward the authority. I'm just saying that's a consideration that although I haven't seen it before, it's certainly a consideration I can see possibly coming up when we think about this.
Okay. This is a little tricky. Again, I don't see this as a practical matter. I don't think that even if we went down to 2 years, we're actually going to shut these guys down in 2 years. I can't imagine that happening, but it could. It's possible that a different council, who knows what's going to happen. Is there a way to close an authority and immediately start a new one so that we don't dissolve Richter Park and have asset sales and a huge disaster? In other words, stop this authority and then a second later start a new authority with new people. Can you roll one over, an old one into a new one?
Good. But since this authority is already created, you have to let that run-out period occur. So you have to let that year's time elapse where you take care of the dissolution business.
Lame ducks.
And then during that time, you could develop and consider another authority, which then would take place and take effect after that year or some period of time like that.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Levy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do remember through the chair to the Corporation Council, in the past, we floated bonds for the Richter Authority to the tune of $500,000, but the city was the co-signer on those bonds in the event of default, so that it really didn't impair the authority at all as far as its bonding capacity is concerned.
And that's probably true. I'm not sure, however, what other financing mechanisms and authorities that have been in place for that long might have. And do they have a credit line someplace, or are there other contractors that might provide service and expectation of funding, things like that. It's hard to know about those.
But that's been my past experience. The other thing is, just as a matter of interest, my thoughts were in no way consideration of elimination of the authority or the process, although I've been involved on entity review boards before where we have terminated the boards, and it doesn't come about just by a simple action of the board. There's many steps that go through and quite a period of time before the entity is eliminated or sunsetted out, which the purpose of the entity review board is. But the 2 years would be just, I look at it more of an assistance to the board, because this is, even though it's created as a separate entity, the Richter Park Authority, it's made a separate entity so that it has somewhat, it's not subject to the political whims of the community, and that it could operate in a somewhat impartial way to serve the community best. And I think it's doing that. But I see by shortening the distance on the certification, which is allowable under the entities review ordinance, and for good reason, just to be ready, keep our hand on it. That's our responsibility as the legislative body of the city. It's one of our authorities that comes underneath of us statutorily, and that we see that they have a little problem. It's a much more competitive day in the golfing business than it was when they were first put in place, and I think that we could stand ready to assist them, either a direct grant or co-signing in any kind of financing that they thought was a wise thing to do. So I look at it not for, in any way, form, or fashion, the eliminating the entity, but just to monitor it closely at a time when it's in trouble.
Anything else? At this time, I'd like to pass the gavel to Mr. Seabury, because I would like to speak on this issue. I am truly concerned about shortening the term of the Richter Park Authority. What we are talking about here is the entity of the authority. I'm not talking about the board of the authority, who may or may not have not done a great job of running the Richter House, which has just certainly come to light in recent history to us. And I will tell you, as one person sitting on this council, I don't have nearly enough information to make a decision of whether there was malfeasance on their part, or there was misconduct on their part, or whether it's just something that happened. But I will tell you that the Richter Park Authority, for all of my years in Danbury, has run well, and it has run well with the board members that it had. Board members change, authority members change, and they will change. And I think that by limiting them to a 2-year authority by actions of this council tonight at our next council meeting would only, as Mr. Pinter said, maybe put them in a position where they could be in trouble in borrowing money. There may be a situation where they need to borrow money for repair of the Richter House, and somebody may say, well, why did the council only extend your authority for 2 years? Why are they concerned about you? Is there something more going on that we need to know about? So I would tell you tonight, be deliberate, think about what you're voting on. I will not be supporting the amendment to the motion. I will be supporting the main motion, which will be to extend the Richter Park Authority out for 5 years. Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, on the amendment that would limit the authority to 2 years. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, I think we're going to have a roll call. Yes would be to limit the authority to 2 years. No would be to not.
Smith? No. Nagershaw?
No.
Johnson?
No.
Palmetto?
No.
Palindrino? Perkins?
No.
Visconti?
Yes.
Chianese?
Yes.
Esposito?
Yes.
Gotti?
Yes.
Cabo?
No.
Costello?
No.
Diggs?
No.
Feischl? No. Arconti?
No.
Tran?
Yes.
Knapp?
Yes.
Levy?
Yes.
Riley?
No.
Seaver?
No.
Stanley? No.
14 noes, 7 yeses, motion fails. Back to the main motion. Any discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll try your minds. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.